Thick plumes of black smoke are rising over the Karg Island oil terminal in the northern Persian Gulf. And according to multiple international media reports, at least 3 of Iran's largest coastal desalination plants have been struck in a coordinated wave of air and missile attacks attributed to the United States and Israel. Satellite imagery published in the last 48 hours reportedly shows severe structural damage to the Bandar Abbas reverse osmosis facility, which supplies fresh drinking water to over 2 million people in the southern Hormozgan province, and early casualty assessments suggest that the immediate humanitarian impact could extend across 8 Iranian cities that depend on desalinated seawater for their daily survival. What you are about to learn in this video is how this escalation unfolded, why the targeting of water infrastructure marks a dangerous new threshold in the conflict, and what Iran's potential retaliation against Arab desalination plants across the Gulf could mean for tens of millions of civilians in the wider Middle East. To understand how the region arrived at this point, we need to go back to the chain of events that began accelerating in late 2025, when the Israeli government, reportedly with direct logistical support from the United States Central Command, launched a series of precision strikes against Iranian oil storage depots and refining facilities along the country's southern coastline. According to a statement attributed to an unnamed senior official at the Pentagon, the operation was intended to, and this is the reported quote, deny the Iranian regime the financial oxygen it uses to fund proxy warfare across the Levant and the Arabian Peninsula. The strikes, which allegedly involved a combination of AGM-158JA SSM cruise missiles launched from B-1B Lancer bombers operating out of Diego Garcia and a volley of Israeli-made ROKS precision-guided munitions fired from F-35 Iyadea stealth fighters, targeted oil tank farms near Bandar Abbas, Bushehr, and the massive Karg Island export terminal, through which an estimated 60% of Iran's crude oil exports pass on their way to international markets. The reported damage was extensive, with analysts at the Washington-based Center for Strategic and International Studies estimating that Iran lost somewhere between 30 and 40% of its above-ground oil storage capacity in the initial wave alone, a figure that, if accurate, would represent a loss of approximately $12 to $15 billion in annualized export revenue. However, the strikes did not stop at petroleum targets. And this is where the situation took a far more alarming turn, because a second wave of munitions reportedly struck 3 desalination facilities on the southern Iranian coast, infrastructure that has no direct military application but that provides the fresh water on which millions of Iranian civilians depend every day. Iran's foreign minister reportedly described the attacks as an act of collective punishment against an entire nation and warned that Tehran would respond with equal devastation against those who enabled this aggression, a statement that many analysts interpret as a direct threat not only to Israeli infrastructure but also to the desalination systems of the Gulf Arab states that have aligned themselves with Washington. Now, let's focus on why the targeting of desalination plants represents such a critical escalation. Because to appreciate the full gravity of what is at stake, one needs to understand the extraordinary dependence of the entire Persian Gulf region on desalinated seawater for basic human survival. The Middle East is the most water-scarce region on the planet, and countries lining the western and southern shores of the Persian Gulf have, over the past 4 decades, constructed the largest concentration of desalination infrastructure anywhere in the world. Saudi Arabia alone operates more than 30 major desalination facilities, including the massive Ras Al Khair plant on its eastern coast, which produces over 1 million cubic meters of fresh water per day and is believed to be the single largest desalination complex on Earth. The United Arab Emirates draws an estimated 98% of its municipal drinking water from desalination, primarily through plants like the Jebel Ali facility in Dubai, which has a capacity of approximately 1 million cubic meters per day, and the Tawila complex in Abu Dhabi, which is reportedly the world's largest reverse osmosis plant, with a daily output of 909,000 cubic meters. Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar all rely on desalination for between 90 and 100% of their potable water, making these among the most water-vulnerable nations on the planet should their coastal processing infrastructure ever come under sustained military attack. Let's zoom in on Iran's own desalination network to understand what was reportedly struck. Iran's southern provinces, particularly Hormozgan, Bushehr, and Cis-Tangent Baluchistan, have become increasingly dependent on desalination over the past decade, as the country's inland freshwater sources, including Lake Urmia and the Zayandeh River Basin, have experienced dramatic depletion. The Bandar Abbas facility, which reportedly sustained the most severe damage, is a reverse osmosis plant with a rated output of approximately 200,000 cubic meters per day, and it serves as the primary water source for the city of Bandar Abbas and surrounding communities totaling roughly 2.3 million people. A second facility near the port city of Bushehr, with a capacity of around 100,000 cubic meters daily, was also reportedly hit, and a third plant under construction near Chabahar in Sis-Tangent Baluchistan province was allegedly struck before it had even begun operations. Taken together, the destruction of these facilities would, according to humanitarian analysts at the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, place between 6 and 8 million Iranians at risk of acute water shortages within days, not weeks, because unlike regions with alternative freshwater sources, the populations served by these plants have virtually no backup supply. Now let's turn our attention to the military dimension of the strikes themselves, because the operational complexity of what was reportedly carried out tells us a great deal about the level of coordination between American and Israeli forces. According to reports from defense analysts at Jane's Defense Weekly, the operation involved at least 3 distinct strike packages launched over a 48-hour period. The first package reportedly consisted of approximately 20 AGM-158B JASSM-ER extended-range cruise missiles, each carrying a 450 kilogram penetrating warhead fired from a pair of B-1B Lancer strategic bombers that had been forward deployed to the Diego Garcia base in the Indian Ocean, roughly 3,400 kilometers south of the Iranian coastline. These missiles, which have a reported range in excess of 900 kilometers, allegedly struck oil tank farms and loading infrastructure at Karg Island and Bushehr. The second strike package was reportedly an Israeli operation involving F-35 Ayadea fighters of the 140th Squadron, known as the Golden Eagle Squadron, based at Nevatim Air Base in the Negev Desert, which allegedly penetrated Iranian airspace using a combination of electronic warfare support from American EA-18G Growler aircraft operating from the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower carrier strike group in the Gulf of Oman, and a corridor negotiated through Iraqi and possibly Saudi airspace. These aircraft reportedly delivered ROKS air-to-surface munitions, a Rafael-developed standoff weapon with a range of approximately 300 kilometers and GPS-guided precision against the desalination plants and secondary oil targets. A third wave, reportedly involving Tomahawk Block V cruise missiles launched from the Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer USS Fitzgerald and the Ticonderoga-class cruiser USS Shiloh, both assigned to the Eisenhower Strike Group, allegedly targeted Iranian air defense radars and command nodes associated with the Khordad-15 surface-to-air missile system in order to suppress Iran's ability to intercept the incoming ordnance. Now, please look at the map, because the geography of these strikes reveals something critical about the operational planning involved. The oil infrastructure and desalination plants that were reportedly struck all sit within a relatively narrow coastal strip running approximately 700 kilometers from Bushehr in the northwest to Chabahar in the southeast, and this strip is defended by a layered Iranian air defense network that any attacking force would need to suppress or circumvent. Iran's air defense architecture in the southern sector is anchored by the Russian-supplied S-300 PMU-2 system, designated Favorite, with batteries reportedly deployed at Bushehr to protect the nuclear facility there and at Bandar Abbas to cover the Strait of Hormuz approaches. These systems have an engagement range of approximately 200 kilometers against aircraft and roughly 40 kilometers against ballistic missiles, and they are supplemented by Iran's indigenously developed Bavar 373 long-range air defense system, which Tehran claims is comparable to the Russian S-400 and which has reportedly been deployed to protect high-value targets along the Gulf Coast since 2019. The fact that the strikes apparently penetrated these defenses with relatively limited losses suggests either a very effective suppression campaign using electronic warfare and anti-radiation missiles, or a significant gap between Iran's claimed air defense capabilities and their actual operational performance, a question that will undoubtedly be studied by military analysts for years to come. Heading south across the Strait of Hormuz, we see the immediate military response that Iran has reportedly begun assembling. According to unconfirmed reports from regional intelligence sources, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, which operates independently from Iran's conventional naval forces and maintains its headquarters at Bandar Abbas, has deployed an estimated 40 to 60 fast attack craft, including Zulfikar-class and Paykab-class missile boats, into positions along the northern side of the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 21 million barrels of oil pass every single day, accounting for roughly 20% of the world's total petroleum supply. These small, fast vessels are equipped with Chinese-derived C-800 and 2 Nor anti-ship cruise missiles, and are designed to operate in swarm tactics that can overwhelm the defenses of even well-protected warships, and their deployment into the strait represents one of Iran's most direct tools for retaliatory escalation. Additionally, reports suggest that the IRGC Aerospace Force has placed its Shahab 3 medium-range ballistic missile batteries, which have an operational range of approximately 1,300 kilometers and can reach any target in Israel, on elevated alert status, with mobile transporter erector launchers reportedly dispersed away from their known garrison positions near Tabriz and Isfahan to pre-surveyed field sites in the Zagros mountain range, where they are significantly harder to locate and destroy. But this is only part of the picture, because Iran's retaliatory options extend far beyond its own borders. Let's turn our attention to what analysts consider the most dangerous counter-escalation scenario, which is an Iranian strike campaign against the desalination infrastructure of the Gulf Arab states, specifically Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Kuwait, all of which host American military facilities and have provided varying degrees of support for the US-Israeli campaign. Iran possesses a diverse arsenal of ballistic and cruise missiles that can reach every desalination plant in the Gulf, and the distances involved are remarkably short. The Ras Al Khair desalination complex in Saudi Arabia sits approximately 280 kilometers from the Iranian coastline, well within the range of Iran's Fateh 313 short-range ballistic missile, which has a circular error probable of reportedly less than 50 meters when using its GPS-aided terminal guidance system. The Jebel Ali complex in Dubai is roughly 200 kilometers from Iranian territory across the Strait of Hormuz, and the Sitra desalination plant in Bahrain, which provides approximately half of that small island nation's fresh water, is only about 250 kilometers from the Iranian coast, and Bahrain notably hosts the headquarters of the United States Fifth Fleet at Naval Support Activity Bahrain. Iran has also demonstrated the capability to strike with precision at even greater ranges, as shown by the October 2024 Operation True Promise 2, when the IRGC launched an estimated 180 ballistic missiles at Israeli targets, roughly 1,600 kilometers away, including Emad and Ghada 110 variants that reportedly struck Nevatim and Ramon airbases in the Negev. So, what does this mean on the ground for civilian populations in the Gulf? The arithmetic of vulnerability is staggering and deeply concerning. If Iran were to successfully strike even 5 or 6 of the largest desalination facilities on the western side of the Persian Gulf, the immediate impact would be a catastrophic loss of fresh water supply, affecting an estimated 20 to 25 million people, because these nations have virtually no alternative freshwater sources that can operate at the scale required to sustain their urban populations. Riyadh, a city of roughly 8 million people located deep in the interior of the Arabian Peninsula, receives a significant portion of its water from desalinated seawater that is piped over 450 kilometers from plants on the Gulf Coast, and a sustained disruption to those plants would, according to a 2023 assessment by the International Water Management Institute, leave the Saudi capital with less than 72 hours of emergency water reserves before the onset of a full-scale humanitarian crisis. Abu Dhabi maintains approximately 48 hours of strategic water reserves in underground storage facilities, and Dubai has reportedly increased its buffer to approximately 96 hours in recent years, but these figures assume normal consumption rates and would be rapidly depleted if the population began panic stockpiling, which is all but certain in the event of a military strike on water infrastructure. However, the surprises don't end there, because there are powerful restraining factors that could prevent this worst-case scenario from materializing, and they deserve serious analysis. The first and most significant restraining factor is the near certainty of a massive American military response if Iran were to attack Gulf Arab desalination infrastructure, because the United States maintains approximately 45,000 military personnel across the Gulf region, with major installations at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which serves as the forward headquarters of U.S. Central Command, and hosts over 10,000 American service members. Camp Arifjan in Kuwait, which supports roughly 13,000 personnel, and the Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. An Iranian strike on civilian infrastructure in states hosting these forces would almost certainly be interpreted by Washington as a direct attack on American strategic interests, and according to retired U.S. Navy Admiral James Stavridis, who formerly served as NATO's Supreme Allied Commander Europe, any attack on the desalination infrastructure of America's Gulf partners would cross a red line that makes prior escalations look modest by comparison. The second restraining factor is economic, because Iran's own economy depends heavily on the ability to export crude oil through the Persian Gulf, and a wider war that shut down maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz would devastate Iran's remaining oil revenues just as severely as it would hurt the Gulf Arab states, creating a situation of mutual economic destruction that serves no one's strategic interests. The third factor is diplomatic, as China, which imports approximately 40% of Iran's crude oil exports and has a growing strategic partnership with Tehran, has reportedly communicated through back-channel diplomatic contacts that it would view an Iranian attack on Gulf desalination plants as a deeply destabilizing act that would threaten China's own energy security, given that roughly 40% of China's imported crude passes through the Strait of Hormuz as well. At this point, We need to recall that Iran has also demonstrated a willingness to use its network of proxy forces across the region as instruments of retaliation, which adds yet another layer of complexity to the escalation dynamics. Hezbollah, which maintains an arsenal of an estimated 130,000 to 150,000 rockets and missiles in southern Lebanon, according to assessments by Israeli military intelligence, has the capability to target the Haifa oil refinery and petrochemical complex on Israel's northern coast, a facility that processes approximately 9 million tons of crude oil per year and sits only about 35 kilometers from the Lebanese border. Reports from the last several weeks indicate that Hezbollah has already launched a series of retaliatory strikes against northern Israeli targets, including what was reportedly an Iranian-supplied Fateh 110-derived missile aimed at the Haifa Bay industrial zone, although Israeli air defense systems, including the Iron Dome and David Sling, reportedly intercepted the majority of incoming projectiles. In Iraq, Iranian-aligned militia groups, including Kataib Hezbollah and Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba, have allegedly launched armed drone attacks against the Ain al-Assad airbase in Anbar province, which hosts approximately 2,500 American military personnel, using Shahed 136 loitering munitions that have become increasingly common on the battlefields of the Middle East and Ukraine alike. Furthermore, Yemen's Ansar Allah movement, commonly known as the Houthis, which controls the capital Sana'a and much of the country's northern territory, has reportedly intensified its attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, using a combination of anti-ship ballistic missiles and explosive-laden unmanned surface vessels to threaten tanker traffic approaching the Suez Canal from the south. The Houthis have reportedly declared that they will target any vessel bound for Israeli ports as well as ships flagged to nations participating in the strikes against Iran, a threat that, if carried out consistently, would force commercial shipping to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope, adding approximately 10 to 14 days to transit times between Asia and Europe and increasing per voyage fuel costs by an estimated $1.5 million per large container ship. In such a scenario where Iran decides to escalate further, the potential for the conflict to spiral into a wider regional war becomes significantly more acute, and several military analysts have outlined what they consider to be the most likely escalation pathways. If Iran were to target Emirati desalination infrastructure, the UAE's own military, which operates a fleet of 80 F-16E, F Block 60 Desert Falcon fighters, and has recently acquired Patriot PAC-3 and THAAD missile defense systems, valued at over $3 billion, would likely enter the conflict as an active combatant rather than simply a logistics provider, fundamentally altering the balance of forces in the region. Saudi Arabia, which possesses the largest defense budget in the Arab world at approximately $75 billion annually and operates advanced platforms including the Eurofighter, Typhoon and F-15SA Strike Eagle, would face enormous domestic pressure to respond militarily if its desalination plants and the populations they serve came under attack. This could lead to a coalition operation against Iranian military targets that would dwarf anything seen in the region since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, involving potentially hundreds of combat aircraft, multiple carrier strike groups, and a combined naval force that could blockade Iran's ports and effectively shut down its ability to export oil or import refined fuel. However, it is equally important to consider the scenario in which restraint prevails, because there are voices within both the American and Iranian governments that reportedly recognize the catastrophic nature of a full regional war. According to diplomatic sources cited by Reuters, back-channel communications between Washington and Tehran, mediated through the Sultanate of Oman, which has traditionally served as an intermediary between the two countries, are reportedly ongoing despite the public hostility, and the focus of these discussions is allegedly a mutual de-escalation framework that would involve Iran agreeing to refrain from attacking civilian infrastructure in exchange for a cessation of further strikes on Iranian soil and a loosening of certain oil export sanctions. Whether such a framework can hold in the face of domestic political pressures on both sides remains deeply uncertain, because Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei faces enormous pressure from hardliners within the IRGC to respond forcefully, while the American and Israeli governments have framed the strikes as a defensive necessity that cannot be walked back without appearing weak. Russia, which maintains a significant military presence in neighboring Syria and has deepened its strategic cooperation with Iran since the beginning of the Ukraine war, has reportedly offered to mediate through the United Nations Security Council, although Western diplomats have expressed skepticism about Moscow's neutrality given that Russia has been a major supplier of advanced military equipment to Tehran, including the S-300 air defense system and, according to unconfirmed reports, technical assistance for Iran's ballistic missile program. The United Nations Secretary-General has reportedly called for an immediate ceasefire and the establishment of a humanitarian corridor to deliver emergency water supplies to affected Iranian populations, but the practical challenges of delivering sufficient fresh water to 8 million people in a conflict zone are enormous, and humanitarian organizations operating in the region have warned that the window for preventing a full-scale water crisis is measured in days rather than weeks. The fundamental tension at the heart of this crisis is that each side views its own actions as defensive and the others as aggressive. And without a credible neutral mediator who can bridge that perceptual gap, the risk of further escalation remains dangerously high. So, how is Israel positioning itself against the possibility of a broader Iranian response? According to reports from Israeli media outlets including Haaretz and the Times of Israel, the Israel Defense Forces have activated the full spectrum of their multi-layered missile defense architecture, including the Arrow 3 exo-atmospheric interceptor designed to engage ballistic missiles at altitudes above 100 kilometers. The Arrow 2 system for endo-atmospheric engagement, David Sling for medium-range threats, and the Iron Dome for short-range rockets and cruise missiles. The Israeli Navy's SAR-6 class corvettes, equipped with the Sea Dome naval variant of Iron Dome and the Barak 8 long-range surface-to-air missile system, have reportedly deployed to the eastern Mediterranean to provide seaward defense against cruise missile threats, while the Israeli Air Force maintains combat air patrols over northern Israel using F-35I Adir and F-15I Ram fighters. The entire Israeli home front has reportedly been placed on elevated alert status, with the Home Front Command distributing updated guidance to the civilian population regarding shelter locations and emergency water storage procedures, a grim irony given that this crisis began with the destruction of another nation's water infrastructure. Let's turn our attention to the wider economic consequences of this crisis. Because the disruption to global energy markets has already been severe even in the absence of a full Strait of Hormuz closure. The strait itself is only about 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, and the shipping lanes through which tankers must pass are even narrower, consisting of 2 one-way traffic corridors, each approximately 3 kilometers wide, separated by a 3-kilometer buffer zone. Iran controls the entire northern coastline of the strait, and has fortified the islands of Abu Musa, Greater Tumb, and Lesser Tumb with anti-ship missile batteries, coastal defense guns, and surveillance systems that give the IRGC Navy near-complete situational awareness over all maritime traffic transiting the choke point. According to a 2024 assessment by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Iran has also pre-positioned approximately 2,000 naval mines of various types, including the EM-52 rocket-propelled Rising mine, at storage facilities near the strait, and the deployment of even a fraction of this stockpile could render the waterway impassable to commercial shipping for weeks or months, while minesweeping operations were conducted by the U.S. Navy's Mine Countermeasures Squadron, which operates 4 Avenger-class mine countermeasure ships forward deployed to Bahrain. Oil prices have reportedly surged past $120 per barrel in the days following the initial strikes, up from approximately $85 per barrel in the weeks before, representing a price increase of over 40% that analysts at Goldman Sachs have warned could push global inflation higher by an estimated 1 to 1.5 percentage points if sustained over the coming quarter. Insurance rates for tanker traffic through the Persian Gulf have reportedly increased by over 300%, with some Lloyd's of London syndicates refusing to underwrite voyages through the Strait of Hormuz altogether, effectively creating a de facto reduction in oil transport capacity even without a physical blockade. The economic impact extends well beyond energy, because the Persian Gulf is also a critical artery for containerized shipping and liquefied natural gas exports, with Qatar alone accounting for approximately 21% of global LNG trade, and any disruption to these flows would have cascading consequences for energy markets in Europe and Asia. The situation as it stands today is one of the most dangerous and consequential escalations the Middle East has witnessed in decades, with the destruction of civilian water infrastructure introducing a dimension of humanitarian vulnerability that makes this conflict qualitatively different from previous confrontations between Iran and the US-Israeli alliance. Millions of lives depend on fragile industrial systems that sit exposed on open coastlines, within easy reach of precision-guided weapons, and the terrible logic of deterrence through infrastructure vulnerability means that the very plants that sustain human life have become the highest value targets in a potential regional war. The question that now confronts decision-makers in Washington, Jerusalem, Tehran, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and beyond is whether the pursuit of military advantage is worth the risk of triggering a humanitarian catastrophe that no amount of political maneuvering could contain once it begins. Will cooler heads prevail and pull the region back from the brink? Or has the cycle of strikes and counterstrikes already built too much momentum to stop? Don't forget to share your comments below the video, presented by TGN. Thank you for choosing us.